Hi everyone, welcome to another week of Healthy Cook Up with Dr. Soski. Thanks for joining me. So this week is going to be kind of an interesting week. This is a little showcase into how I cook normally at my house. I often don't follow recipes, so this one today I made up. Kind of riffing off what did I have in my garden that I wanted to use and use up. So I have a bunch of cherry tomatoes that I need to use. I have a bunch of them. I have beets coming up that are ready, and I have tons and tons of green beans. So I was trying to think, what could I do with that? So roasted beets was what came to mind, and then I needed protein, so I have lentils, so I thought we'd throw in some lentils. And so yes, this is like a little window into how I kind of create a meal from nothing if I don't have a recipe. So we'll dive in just a second. Today's video is dedicated to the Trauma Response and Crisis Care organization called TRAC, and it's so Crisis Care for Movement Spaces, and it's a really great organization that I just became involved with. I'm doing a training with them for healers and providers and healthcare practitioners to learn how to help those who have been traumatized because of being in a movement space. And so movements are, things as big as civil rights movements, or as small as, on a campus being involved in a political action to create a change on your campus. Oftentimes in these spaces, there's trauma that involves both from the impact of an oppressive system being in place onto a group of people. And then also within the activist community, there's trauma that happens amongst interpersonal people. So there's a lot of different ways that folks become traumatized and move into space. And so this group is really dedicated to helping alleviate that trauma and create training so that we can appropriately address the trauma in these folks. And so, for example, even with they had a whole COVID care crisis team that they put together when that all hit back in March. So really awesome organization. Right now the best way to support them is to purchase a gift card. That's kind of how you can sponsor a scholarship for a provider to attend one of their trainings. Their training just started yesterday, so I'm in that group. And there's still spaces available, and they want to continue offering scholarships. So if you want to donate, that would be a way to donate to that group. Also, right now, I'm collecting personal donations just to my personal PayPal. I'm putting together kits for some folks who have experienced a lot of trauma here in the Portland area, protesting and whatnot. And so I'm trying to support them on a mental, emotional, and physical level. So if you would like to get involved with that, just please shoot me a message, and I'll tell you how to get involved. All right, so let's dive right in. So we're going to start by preheating our oven because we're going to roast some beets. So I'm going to preheat it to 375. That is in my oven. That's what we want. That's what's turn it on. Alright, so we're going to preheat the oven, and then I'm going to chop up some beets. And I'm going to chop them into some pretty small pieces because I want it to cook quickly so that it doesn't take up a bunch of time. If you cut them too big, they just end up taking a lot of time in the oven. So I'm going to cook them pretty small. I have two different kinds of beets here. So I have some Chioggia beets and then also some bull's blood, which are the more darker purple. Beets are really awesome. They have a lot of really potent antioxidants. They're really good for your liver health. They will turn your poop red. So just know that if you eat a bunch of beets and then the next morning you think you might have a colon bleed, just know that it's probably the beets. You're probably just fine. I know I've scared myself. Also, if you eat enough of them, it'll actually turn your urine purple as well, or kind of reddish. So that's just something to be aware of if you're eating a bunch of beets, especially if you're not used to it. It can kind of color your excrement, if you will. So again, I'm chopping pretty small pieces, kind of that size, so that they cook really quickly. If you're cooking along and you want to make them bigger, that's totally fine. You just may need to wait at the end to let them cook a little bit longer than I'm letting them cook. So I got bull's blood. It's really purple, that deep classic beet color. As usual, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to drop it in the comment section. Thanks, Dr. E, for the shout out. Alright, so I love the color of these, just so purple. I will wash my hands. As you see, they will turn purple as you cut them, and I don't. If you let it sit on, it has the potential to stain. Also, too, just a tip if you're working with beets, to wear an apron if you can remember, or at least not something white. I have definitely gotten beet all over my front. The other day, I was actually drinking some beet juice mixed with some other juice, but the beet kind of takes over. And I was wearing a white shirt, and I spilled it all down the front of my white shirt. And I don't think there's enough cleaning in the world that can be able to fully get that out. So I think that shirt is just going to be a house shirt now. But that is just one of the beauties that comes with eating beets. So we're just about to cut these out. And then another thing I wanted to show you guys in this recipe was just the versatility of one of the recipes I did a couple weeks ago. Okay. So a couple weeks ago, I did a garden salad where I highlighted a vinaigrette recipe, which is really great because you can make a big quantity of it, use some for your salad, store it in the fridge. It stores for a very long time. And what it's also awesome about it is that it makes really, really good marinade for roasted veggies. So I'm going to make up, I don't have any made up right now. I actually just used some this weekend. It was really, really good. I marinated some veggie. I went camping and we had a grill there. And so I marinated some veggies in this vinaigrette. And then we put them on kebab skewers and grilled them. And it was really, really good. So this vinaigrette recipe is super versatile and very tasty for all kinds of different things. So, so I'm going to make some up really quickly to throw on these beets. So this does also happen to be an onion that I grew in my garden. It was very small. My onions did not get very big this year, but that's okay. I'm also going to do the folk method of doing this. I included the exact measurements in the description under the video, so you can look, but I'm a huge fan of not measuring when I cook, so I'm going to do it that way today and just show you guys that. I'm also going to put a little bit extra garlic in than I probably would normally because this is the only garlic that's going to be used in this recipe, or, well, that's not true, but that's going to end up in the final product. And also, since we're cooking it, you can use a little bit more. When you're leaving it raw, the garlic really has a very potent flavor. But when you cook it, it has a less potent flavor, and so you can use more of it. I learned that the hard way making pesto because it was the first time, this was a while ago, but a long time ago now. It was the first time I really used garlic raw, and I thought, well, in most recipes, I double the amount of garlic it calls for, so I'm just going to double the amount of garlic it calls for in this pesto. And it was very, very intense pesto. It was very spicy, very garlicky. It was intense. And I have since learned that you can always double or triple the amount of garlic in a cooked recipe, but in a raw recipe, you might not want to do that. You can usually add a little bit more than it calls for, but you do have to be careful. So since we're cooking this today, and then I'm making a little bit less than what the whole recipe calls for, just because I actually just don't have a lot of olive oil. That's the main reason. Otherwise, usually I make this in a big batch, use what I need, and then store the rest. But today I'm just going to use everything that I make up today. Alright, so we have onion and garlic. And then we're going to do some balsamic vinegar. And some Italian seasoning. A bit of pepper. A pinch of salt. And then to balance out the vinegar, we're going to add just a touch of maple syrup. Alright, and then we're going to mix that all together. And then lastly, we're going to add olive oil. All right. So once we have our vinaigrette all made up, now if you watched the video before, I did this a little bit differently today. So because we were making a salad, what I did was I waited to add the oil until the onions and the peppers, the onion and the spices and the garlic had really marinated together, and then added the olive oil. But since I need it ready to go throw on these beets right now, we're just going to add it all together. So I got a really good question. So what kind of salt do I use? That's a really good question because not all salt is created equal. I use Redmond's real salt. It's not a sea salt, but it is a non-iodized salt, and I do think that sea salt is best. Redmond's real salt is also really good. It's got a lot of minerals. It's a high mineral salt, so that's why I personally like it. I think sea salt and Himalayan salt is good. I'm really not a fan of just processed regular salt because of what we have done to our food supply. So salt became iodized, to add iodine to our diets because we were iodine deficient, and which I think that's not a bad thing. But what happened is when they added iodine and the salt itself, it caked more, and so then they had to add an anti-caking agent. And then the combination of all that didn't taste very good, and so then they added dextrose, so to make it taste good, which is kind of a sweet flavor. So what we took is we took salt and then added 3 more ingredients, 3 very processed ingredients, and I'm a huge fan of as least processed as possible. So which is why I really prefer real salt. Or sea salt or pink Himalayan salt. Those are all really less processed sugars, whole form, and not a lot and no additives. So great question. All right, so I mixed all the beets and the vinaigrette together, And now I'm just putting it on a baking tray and we're going to set it in the oven. And it's okay if there's extra liquid, it'll really caramelize as it cooks, and if there's any extra liquid on the pan, it'll just kind of become a sauce for the salad in the end. So that is great. So we're just going to leave it. Okay, and we're going to throw it in and set a timer for 20 minutes. All right, so next thing we're going to do is our lentils. That's going to take the next longest to cook. So this is from a lentil recipe that was posted to my YouTube channel. I did a private cooking class with a good friend and colleague, and she actually came up with this lentil recipe, and we used it in that. So you probably haven't seen it on my Facebook Lives, but if you go to my YouTube channel, which is linked in the comment or in the description, you can watch that whole class. But this lentil recipe is really delicious. So essentially, you take lentils that you've been soaked. These have been soaked for about 6 to 8 hours, and that just really helps them cook quicker. It's not super necessary, but again, it just makes them cook quicker. You take 2 bay leaves, throw them in. So one thing I learned from my friends, who you'll see in my video, is that lentils really take on the flavor that you cook them with. So you can really add some really awesome flavor in when you cook lentils, and they'll really absorb it. And that's what I found. This recipe is just, it makes them taste so delicious. So 2 bay leaves, 1 big cinnamon stick. I have some little pieces here, so I'm gonna add a couple little pieces. I'm going to add a couple cloves of garlic, and you can just leave them whole or slightly crushed. You can cut them up too, it doesn't really matter, it's more for the flavor. And then a 1/4 teaspoon of oregano. Again, we're doing the folk method today, so I'm just going to do a pinch of oregano. Did also happen to grow this oregano. I'm very proud of it. And a pinch of salt. And then we're going to add water and then bring this to boil and cook it for about 20 minutes. I'm also going to get some other water just boiling because I'm going to blanch the green beans that we're going to use. So I'm going to just get some water boiling back here. All right, so while those things are cooking, we're just going to prep all of the other pieces of this that are going to go in. The great thing about this recipe is because it's kind of like a hodgepodge of what I had available, it can be a hodgepodge of what you have available. So I'm going to do green beans and the tomatoes today, and then I also have some olives that I need to use up. So I'm going to throw some olives in there. I was going to use lettuce also from my garden, but then a friend gave me a bunch of microgreens, so I'm going to throw microgreens in there. Some other awesome things would be red pepper would be delicious, fennel, avocado would be really good, just throwing it in raw. All of these things would be really delicious in there. So you can kind of do what you want. I think it would be really good. I don't personally eat dairy, but you could top it with some feta cheese or some goat cheese or some vegan cheese that's goat-like. I think it would be really good. Also, too, if you wanted to do a green with this would be a good time to get that going. I happen to have some quinoa that I have left over that I need to use up. So I'm going to throw this over some quinoa. But you could also cook up some rice, some quinoa, throw it over some lettuce if you're trying to go low carb. And then just this is a note more on vegan proteins in general. This is a shout out to Andy Erlandson, who's been commenting, because this is something that I learned in a class, in one of his classes that he taught. Is that when you, so there's a, if you are new to the vegan protein world, and that's, or to the vegan cooking world, and this is a common question that vegans always get asked: how do you get your protein? Are you getting enough protein? It's more than possible to get all your protein from vegan sources. You just have to be a little bit more intentional with it. So protein is made up of something called amino acids, and those are little building blocks that make up protein. And there's various different, there's many different amino acids, and there are some that are called essential. And they're called essential because we can't make them in our body. We have to get them from our food. So meat, all animal protein, has all of the essential amino acids already in it. Now, plant-based sources, there's only a couple that I know of, quinoa being one of them, that has all of the amino acids present in a healthy ratio. They all have the amino acids, but you need them in a specific ratio, or you need enough of them. And that's why you often see in plant-based cooking that you need to pair a bean with a grain. So beans and rice, beans and corn, lentils and corn. Oh, soy is another one that is a complete, so there is a kind of a misunderstanding, though, that you have to consume them within the same meal. And this is what I learned from Andy Erlandson, is that you don't have to eat them within the same meal. Just you kind of have to eat them both eventually. So whether it's in the same day, if you want, have a grain for breakfast and beans at dinner, that's great too. Even if you went to the next day, it's just that you want to make sure that you are consuming both regularly in your diet versus only relying on one or the other, so that you can make sure that you get enough of all the essential amino acids from plants. And so the beans and the grains, the legumes and the grains, really complement each other with what they both have high amounts of and what they're lacking, and that's why it's good to combine them. That, and it's delicious. So I really like blanching green beans when I'm throwing them in a salad, because you can definitely throw them in raw, and you can definitely cook them even more. I find blanching is kind of that middle ground. So what blanching means is putting them in boiling water for 30 seconds to a minute, but definitely closer to the 30 seconds. It's kind of to cook the outside and get them a little bit more tender without cooking them all the way through. If you want them more cooked, you can definitely cook them longer. If you want them raw, you can definitely do raw. All of them are great options. So I'm just going to put these up into little bite-sized pieces. And what you saw me do is cut the ends off the green beans. That's not super necessary, but I find the ends to be a little tough and hard to chew, so I like cutting the ends off. But some people don't like that. It's time consuming too, so it's not necessary. It has nothing. It's more of a preference versus a function. Now, green beans are in the legume family, but they're not a great source of protein. That was a debate between me and my partner at one point. So we Googled it, and that's what we came to, is that they do have some protein. All plants have some protein, but they're not a great source. So I wouldn't use green beans just on their own as a protein source, but they are a great vegetable. They're really great in high in fiber, B vitamins. All right. boiling, so I'm just going to turn it down a little bit. And we're just going to let those simmer. All right, the next thing we're going to do is cut up some cherry tomatoes. With this, I'm going to use, I find using a serrated knife with tomatoes is better because sometimes their skin doesn't cut as easily, and you just end up squishing them if you use a flat-bladed knife. So I like using serrated knife. I don't think we're going to use all of this. So tomatoes are really high in a phytonutrient called lycopene. I think I've highlighted it before in one of my videos. It's got antioxidant properties, anti-cancer properties. It's really good for men's health. The yellow ones don't have as much lycopene as red tomatoes. It's really that red color that gives it the lycopene. But we have yellow cherries right now, so that's what we're going to use. Just pulling the stems off. And for these, I'm just going to have them. I'm going to cut them in half. Most of them are pretty tiny. Trying to focus so I don't cut my fingers because they're so small. This is going to be the last of my cherry tomatoes for the year. The plant is already on its way out. That's good. And I think our water's boiling, so now we're going to blanch our green beans. Again, we're doing a blanch, so I'm just going to stay tuned real quick because I'm going to, after about 30 seconds, I'm going to go run over and drain them. I'm going to get the bowl ready, so this is going to be our big mixing bowl for everything we get thrown into. So I'm going to throw some tomatoes in here. Trying to just clock. So next we're going to get our olives ready. I think that's enough time on the green beans. So now I'm going to So we got our green beans ready. They're all hot and toasted and blanched. Just gonna put that in. Well, we still have about 5 more minutes on the beets and the lentils. So I'm gonna just chop some olives up. These are Kalamata olives. If you're gonna cook with olives, I would recommend getting pitted olives. You can pit them yourself, but it's a lot of work, so why not have someone else do it for you who has a professional pitter. Stuffed olives are also really good if you get ones stuffed with like pepper or with garlic. That's really good to throw in, even to recipes. I mean, it's really good to eat on its own, but it's really good to throw in recipes also. To get that extra flavor. Olives are a really awesome source of healthy fats, and also a lot of antioxidants because they're dark purple color. Usually in the plant world, dark purple always equals lots of antioxidants. Olive oil has been linked very heavily to improved heart health, improved digestive health, improved less cancer. I think olive oil is really, really amazing. All the countries in the Mediterranean region have it right for sure. And you see in those areas a lot less disease, especially that compared to what we have in the United States. So, all right, we got our olives, we got our green beans. And so while we're waiting for the beets, we have a few more minutes. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop it in the comment section, and I could definitely answer your questions. Otherwise, I'm going to tell you one of my tricks to making quinoa, which is how I made this quinoa here, which is already made up, so I'm not going to actually show you, because I'm going to have way too much quinoa. But the way I make that is I actually really like cooking the quinoa in with some tomato sauce. I find that the quinoa really takes on flavor. If anybody has tasted quinoa on its own and doesn't like it, this can be a really great way to make it more flavorful on its own. So what I did for this one is I actually, since I am growing tomatoes, I kind of made my own salsa in the blender. And so I took tomatoes, some red onion, garlic, cilantro, jalapeno, some cumin, and lime juice, and a little bit of salt and pepper. And I blended that up really fine, so it just made it really liquidy. And then I poured that in with some extra water and cooked the quinoa in with that. And I find that really infuses the quinoa with a lot of awesome flavor. If you don't have tomatoes, you don't want to make it on your own, well, I just go, also what I've done a lot in the past is just use pasta sauce. And I cook it in with the pasta sauce. You do need to add some extra water because the pasta sauce alone doesn't have enough liquid to really cook the quinoa, but you do want to cut back. So let's say with your quinoa, you're doing 1 cup of quinoa to 2 cups of water. You don't need a full 2 cups of water because there is moisture. And you just, depending on what you're using, you kind of have to feel that out. But I would say start with 1 cup, see how cooked you get it. You can always add more water and kind of get it cooked more. But that really infuses the flavor and makes this kind of like tomato-y, delicious quinoa. That's really nice to have on its own with, as a base for other things, and then you don't have to add a lot of extra sauce because it already has flavor. So that's how I like to make quinoa. It's how I learned how to eat quinoa, because at first when I started eating it, I didn't like it. Now I can eat it plain on its own. I really enjoy the flavor. But when I first started eating it, I thought it was really boring, and so this was something I kind of figured out to do to make it taste better on its own. So I hope that helps out folks who are a little hesitant to get into quinoa because of the flavor. So quinoa is something that is a whole, complete protein on its own. It's actually not a grain; it's a seed, and so that's kind of a different aspect of it versus rice, which is a grain. And so, but it cooks. Quinoa does cook like a grain, and so it's treated as a grain. But it has a different amino acid profile than grains and beans, so it's a really great thing to use. Um, for a while, the United States kind of became this like big fad thing, and so there are some global impacts that our quinoa consumption has created on the rest of the world, and that the indigenous places in Central and South America where it's grown, that used to be a staple crop for them, and now because they can make so much more money selling it to people in the United States because they found out about quinoa and really loved it, and it became this really big health food craze. It really actually decimated the fact that it was a staple for these local communities. I think now it's found a little bit more stabilization in that, but so I would say, look for ethically sourced quinoa, or don't make it a staple and the only thing that you use. Use it every so often, but then also mix it up with some rice and other grains so that we're not creating this scarcity in the communities that it comes from. All right, so the beets went off, so I'm going to check on those. So again, I cut them really, really small so that they cook quicker. If you made them bigger, they may take a little bit longer. And even these could go a little bit longer. They're not super soft, but I actually like leaving a little bit of crunch in it. So I'm going to pull them now, but if you're making this at home, feel free to leave them in longer if you want them softer. And now I'm going to taste the lentils and see if the lentils are done. The lentils are done too. So I'm going to strain those out real quick. So we got our lentils. I'm going to pull out the bay leaves and the cinnamon as we go. You can pull the garlic out too if you want. I'm going to leave it in. It's very hot. Getting a lentil steam facial right now. So you might think that throwing the cinnamon in there is really weird, but it's really, really delicious, and it smells amazing also as you're cooking it. So we got our lentils in there, and then we're going to throw our beets in there. And I'm going to scrape this because it has all the really good onion bits and some juices in there too. Versus just pulling the beets off themselves. So all that yummy flavor in with this. Other things that would go really well in here is basil, some arugula, kale would go really well too. Alright, so let's make ourselves a little bowl, huh? Someone just mentioned about the stove. Yeah, this is a pretty awesome kitchen. I am very blessed to have this kitchen. I agree. This is an incredible kitchen. Our stove is a Wolf. If anyone's interested, really good quality stove. They make really good stuff. Commercial grade. All right, so we're gonna serve up some quinoa. Put some salad on here. Lentil beets, green beans, tomato, olive. And then lastly, I'm gonna throw some microgreens on top. Now again, this isn't like a traditional recipe that you would see often on a website, because this is really just a window into how I cook when I get home and I have all these ingredients and I'm like, what do I make with all this? This is definitely one of those recipes, but I think it's one of the brilliant things that you get to do with cooking is just to be creative and see what you have and learn and try things, and they may not always come out amazing, but you can always learn how to adapt them for the future. And just play around. Try something new. See if it goes well. You can always add salt to something if it doesn't taste that good, and it usually makes it a lot better. So, anyway, so we're gonna try. It's really good. Now, in a perfect world, I would add some lemon tahini dressing on top of this. I think that would be the real cake, especially some cheese or something creamy on top would be really good. I'm not going to make it up for today, but for y'all watching at home, you can go back into my previous videos and look for my lemon tahini, lemon garlic tahini recipe. That's really good. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me again this week. I really appreciate all of you guys who tuned in, even if it was for a couple of seconds. Again, this video is dedicated to the trauma response in crisis care for movements. That's track for movements. The link is in the description. They're a really amazing group that are supporting trauma experienced by people involved in movement spaces, and you can support them by purchasing a gift card that acts kind of like a scholarship towards their training program that just started yesterday, that provides scholarships for people and practitioners and healers to participate in their training so that they can go off in the world and provide these services to folks all over the country and all over the world, actually. So please, if you want to, help them out. On a personal note, again, I'm raising money to create some kits and some healing supplies, and also offer my services to folks here in Portland who have experienced a lot of trauma from a lot of the movements going on here. And so if you would like to donate, please just write me a message and I'll tell you how to do that. So thank you guys for tuning in again. We'll see you back here in a couple weeks. Bye.